Close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and allow your thoughts to drift into another version of history. The sleeping city. London rested beneath the night, as though it had always belonged to it. The city lay wrapped in darkness, not as something hidden, but as something protected. Night did not silence London, it softened it. Sounds did not vanish. They became distant, rounded at the edges, as if gently wrapped in cloth. The great city breathed slowly, steadily, in rhythm with the river that curved through its heart. The Thames moved with ancient patience. Its waters slid past stone embankments and wooden docks, carrying reflections of lantern light that stretched and trembled across the surface. Each glow wavered gently, breaking and reforming as the current passed beneath bridges whose arches had watched centuries drift by. The river did not hurry. It had nowhere urgent to go. It carried memory as easily as water. Fog drifted in from the water, thin and pale, curling lazily through riverside streets. It gathered around iron railings and climbed the steps of old stairways worn smooth by countless feet. Gas lamps burned steadily within it, their light spreading outward in warm halos, blurring the boundaries between stone, air, and shadow. Cobblestones glistened faintly where moisture clung to their uneven surfaces. The stones retained the day's warmth, releasing it slowly into the night, as though reluctant to let go. Each street felt grounded, solid, certain of its place. Footsteps were rare. A lone figure crossed a narrow street, coat pulled close, moving without haste. Somewhere farther away, a watchman paused beneath a lamp, leaning gently against his staff, listening to the city rather than scanning it. The faint echo of a bell marked the hour, not sharply, but with a tone softened by distance and mist. Houses stood quietly, close together, their brick faces darkened by age and weather. Windows glowed faintly where candles still burned, their light flickering gently behind drawn curtains. In most homes, the day had already been set aside. Inside, the city rested. Teacups sat drying on wooden racks. Books lay open where reading had drifted into sleep. Fires settled into embers, their warmth lingering in quiet rooms. Families slept beneath thick blankets, breathing in unison with the slow rhythm of the night. London trusted the darkness. In upper rooms and small studies, a few lamps still burned. Scholars worked late not from urgency but devotion. Quills moved carefully across parchment. Pages turned slowly. Shelves lined with leather-bound volumes bore the weight of centuries, histories, philosophies, maps drawn with careful uncertainty. Knowledge here was not rushed. Libraries, even when closed, held silence like a living thing. Tall halls rested in darkness, shelves rising into shadow, their contents waiting patiently. Books did not demand to be read. They simply existed, confident in their permanence. Churches stood unmoving. Stone towers rose into the night sky, their outlines softened by fog. Bells slept. Doors remained closed but welcoming, their presence steady and reassuring. These buildings did not dominate the city, they anchored it. Palaces, too, were quiet. Their grand rooms lay empty of voices, polished floors reflecting only moonlight now. Guards stood at ease, movements minimal, thoughts untroubled. Authority in the night lost its sharpness and became simply another enduring structure. Above it all, the sky stretched wide and patient. Clouds drifted slowly, occasionally parting to reveal stars dulled by the city's glow, yet unwavering in their constancy. The moon hung low, pale and calm, watching rooftops and river alike without judgment. King George's rule rested gently over the city, not in command, but in continuity. Laws existed because they had endured. Traditions remained because they comforted. Power did not press down upon the people, it rested alongside them, familiar and expected. London was not waiting in anticipation. And yet, something subtle moved beneath the calm. Not fear, not excitement. Only the quiet sensation of a page nearing its turn. Conversations earlier in the day had lingered on distant names and distant lands. Maps had been studied with an extra moment of care. Thoughts had paused briefly before moving on. Now, in the night, all of that rested. The river continued its slow journey. Lanterns burned steadily. The city breathed, unchanged and deeply rooted. History, for the moment, chose to be still. Morning over the Thames. Morning arrived in London the way a careful reader turns a page. There was no sudden brightness, no sharp division between night and day. Instead, darkness loosened its hold slowly, releasing the city in stages. The sky shifted first, deep blue softening into pale grey, then into a muted wash of silver. Clouds thinned and stretched, drifting lazily as though untroubled by time. The Thames noticed before the streets did. Its surface lightened, reflections sharpening just enough to reveal the gentle movement of water against stone. The river accepted the dawn without comment, carrying it onward as it had carried countless mornings before. Mist lingered above the surface, thinning gradually, rising and dissolving into the air. Along the embankment, first signs of waking appeared. A door opened quietly. A window lifted an inch to let in the cool air. Somewhere nearby, a kettle was set upon a small fire, its sound barely audible. These movements were not coordinated, yet together they formed a familiar rhythm, London's way of returning to itself. Lanterns dimmed one by one, as daylight grew confident enough to replace them. Their glow faded gently, leaving behind iron posts darkened by soot and rain. The streets revealed their textures again, uneven stones, narrow seams between buildings, the soft sheen left by the night's moisture. Footsteps returned, still unhurried. A baker crossed a courtyard carrying baskets of bread, the warmth rising faintly into the cool air. The smell drifted outward, subtle but comforting, settling into the streets like a promise. A delivery cart rolled slowly along a main road, wheels turning with familiar creaks, the horse moving with patient certainty. Markets began their quiet assembly. Stalls were unfolded carefully, cloths smoothed, crates arranged with practiced ease. There was no shouting yet, no calling out of prices. Vendors worked in near silence, greeting one another with nods, brief smiles, murmured words exchanged more out of habit than necessity. The city's scholars emerged next. They walked with books tucked beneath their arms, coats buttoned neatly, minds already turning inward. Some crossed bridges, pausing briefly to look down at the river, letting their thoughts drift as the water did. Others moved through narrow streets toward libraries and schools, footsteps steady, expressions calm. London did not rush its learning. Schoolhouses opened their doors with care. Desks waited patiently, chalk rested untouched. Teachers arrived early, preparing rooms in quiet concentration, arranging materials not for urgency, but for clarity. Lessons would unfold slowly, thoughtfully, as they always had. In homes throughout the city, families gathered for simple breakfasts. Bread was broken, tea was poured. Conversations remained gentle, focused on the small certainties of the day ahead. There was no sense of foreboding, no weight pressing upon the morning. The city trusted its routines, and they carried it forward without strain. As the sun rose higher, light reached into places that night had kept hidden. Brick warmed, windows brightened, courtyards filled with soft illumination. The fog retreated fully now, leaving the air clean and still, as though freshly arranged. It was into this calm, established morning that a subtle awareness began to form. Not alarm, not excitement, only recognition. Somewhere near the edge of the city, movement unfolded with deliberate gentleness. A presence approached not as interruption but as continuation. London did not turn to look all at once. It sensed rather than reacted. The streets remained steady, carriages passed, shops opened, bells rang the hour with familiar restraint. Yet beneath it all, the city seemed to hold its breath just slightly longer than usual, as though allowing space for something new to enter without disruption. The Thames flowed on, unconcerned, carrying reflections of the brightening sky. Morning settled fully over London, complete, balanced, unhurried, ready to receive whatever the day might gently offer next. The quiet arrival. The city did not notice the moment at once. There was no sound to mark it, no signal carried on the wind. London continued as it always had, wrapped in its morning rhythms, confident in their steadiness. The streets moved gently beneath the growing light, and the people within them followed familiar paths, guided more by habit than intention. And then, almost imperceptibly, Napoleon Bonaparte entered London. He did not arrive as a figure announced, but as a presence absorbed. His first steps into the city blended seamlessly with the motion already unfolding there. The cobblestones received him without distinction. The air offered no resistance. He walked as one who understood the value of matching his pace to the place he entered. His coat was plain, dark, and neatly kept. Its lines were precise but softened by wear. He held his hat in his hand rather than wearing it, a small gesture that revealed attentiveness rather than ceremony. His posture was upright but relaxed, shoulders settled, movements economical and calm. Those nearest to him noticed not because they were startled, but because something in his presence invited a second glance. A shopkeeper paused while arranging jars in a window. A clerk slowed his step, allowing distance to grow between himself and the man ahead. A woman standing at a street corner adjusted her shawl and watched quietly as Napoleon passed. Their expressions carried no fear, only curiosity softened by calm. Napoleon walked without urgency. His gaze moved steadily, taking in the city not as territory but as character. He observed the way streets curved rather than cut straight lines. He noticed how buildings leaned toward one another slightly, as though sharing long-held confidences. Doorways bore marks of countless hands. Stone steps had been worn shallow by generations of use. London revealed itself gradually, and he allowed it the time to do so. The architecture spoke in measured tones. Brickwork, darkened by soot, carried warmth beneath its surface. Windows reflected the sky in uneven panes, each one catching light differently. Iron railings traced delicate patterns, their edges smoothed by years of touch. Napoleon slowed further as he entered older districts. Here, the streets narrowed and sound softened. Footsteps echoed faintly and then dissolved. He passed beneath low arches where shadow gathered gently and emerged into small squares where light settled comfortably as though it had been there before. He breathed in the city. The scent of bread drifted from a nearby bakery, warm and grounding. ink and paper lingered near a printer's shop. Damp stone and clean air mixed together, carrying the quiet assurance of continuity. These were not the smells of preparation or tension. They were the scents of routine. People allowed him space without stepping away. They moved aside instinctively, not out of command, but courtesy. Napoleon acknowledged them with small gestures, a nod, a softened gaze, a slight tilt of the head. There was no need for words. The exchange remained gentle, balanced, complete. A child stood near a doorway, holding a small wooden toy, watching openly. Napoleon met the child's eyes briefly, offering a faint smile before continuing on. The child did not call out. He simply watched, storing the moment away quietly. The city did not resist him, nor did it yield. It continued to be itself, steady and composed, allowing this new presence to pass through its streets as naturally as the light passed through its windows. Napoleon sensed this immediately. He adjusted to it instinctively, letting the city lead. As he crossed a bridge, he paused briefly at its center. The Thames moved beneath him, wide and patient. Its surface carried reflections of the sky and the city without holding on to either. Boats passed slowly, their oars dipping rhythmically, leaving ripples that spread and then disappeared. Napoleon rested his hands lightly on the stone railing and watched. Here, he felt no urgency to move forward. The moment asked only for attention. He allowed his thoughts to drift with the water, considering not plans but balance, not control but continuity. When he resumed walking, he did so with the same unhurried pace. The streets widened again, opening into areas where the city breathed more freely. Trees lined the roads, their leaves stirring faintly. Sunlight filtered through branches and settled in soft patterns across the pavement. Napoleon passed a park gate standing open, its ironwork cool and welcoming. He did not enter yet. He simply noted it, as one notes something that will still be there when the time is right. The people of London continued their day. Markets filled gradually, conversations unfolded quietly, carriages rolled past with familiar creaks. The city accepted his presence the way it accepted the changing angle of the sun, without disruption. By midday, awareness had spread, not as news, but as understanding. Napoleon Bonaparte was in London. And yet, nothing hurried to meet him. The city held its shape, its pace, its calm. It did not demand explanation. It did not seek spectacle. It simply made room, gently and without strain, as Napoleon continued walking forward, step by measured step, into the heart of a city that had already decided to remain at peace. Streets of stone and memory. London revealed itself most clearly when one walked without purpose. Napoleon continued onward, guided not by destination, but by the gentle unfolding of streets that seemed to choose him as much as he chose them. The city did not present itself all at once. It preferred to be discovered gradually, layer by layer, like a well-worn book whose pages had softened with age. Here, Stone remembered, the streets beneath his feet carried centuries quietly within them. Each cobblestone had been placed by hands long gone, yet their work endured, holding firm beneath countless steps. Some stones were rounded smooth, others still bore faint edges, reminders that time moved unevenly, sparing some details while softening others. Buildings rose on either side, close enough to create intimacy rather than confinement. Their facades leaned subtly inward, as though listening. Brickwork varied in shade and texture, darker near the ground where rain and soot had settled, lighter above where air and light reached more freely. Mortar lines traced careful patterns, holding everything together without drawing attention to themselves. Napoleon's gaze followed these details patiently. He noticed how windows differed slightly from one another, even within the same row of houses. Glass panes warped faintly, bending reflections just enough to remind the viewer that they were handmade. Curtains hung at different heights, chosen by unseen hands according to preference rather than instruction. Here and there, a door stood out, a deeper shade of blue, a brighter green, small declarations of individuality within an otherwise harmonious order. Door knockers bore polished impressions of generations of use. Thresholds dipped gently at the center, worn by time and familiarity. The city spoke in textures rather than words. Napoleon passed through districts shaped by different eras, each one resting calmly atop the last. In one street, remnants of Roman stone were set quietly into walls, unnoticed by most, yet steadfast. Nearby, medieval timber frames curved inward, their beams dark and solid, their upper stories leaning gently toward the street below. Further on, Georgian symmetry emerged. Balanced windows, measured proportions, restrained elegance. These newer structures did not erase what came before. They adapted around it, respecting the ground they occupied. Napoleon sensed this continuity deeply. In Paris, the past had often been reshaped to serve the present. In London, the present seemed content to sit beside the past, acknowledging it without needing to correct it. The city did not rush to redefine itself. It trusted its accumulated form. He walked beneath archways where sound changed subtly, footsteps echoing briefly before dissolving. Light shifted here too, becoming narrower, more focused, then opening again into small squares where air and brightness settled comfortably. In one such square, an old plane tree stood at the center. Its trunk was broad and deeply textured, its bark patterned with age. Benches circled its base, worn smooth by decades of use. A few people sat there quietly, an elderly man reading, a woman sewing, a pair of friends sharing unhurried conversation. Napoleon did not stop, but he slowed, allowing the moment to linger. He felt the balance of the place, the way stone and wood, human presence and nature, history and routine coexisted without strain. Nothing here demanded attention. Everything simply belonged. As he moved on, the city's sounds shifted gently. The clatter of hooves faded into the distance. Voices remained low and measured. Even commerce carried restraint. Transactions conducted calmly, without urgency. London did not hurry its exchanges. It trusted that there was enough time. Napoleon passed a row of workshops where craftsmen labored quietly. A cabinet maker planed wood with slow, even strokes, each movement deliberate. A silversmith worked near a window, light glinting softly off polished surfaces. A printer adjusted type with practiced hands, the press standing ready, patient. These were not places of spectacle, they were places of care. Napoleon observed them with respect, sensing how deeply the city valued steady creation over rapid display. Here skill was refined through repetition, not speed. Mastery unfolded over years, not moments. As the afternoon light shifted, shadows lengthened along the streets, emphasizing the contours of buildings and the gentle irregularities of the ground. London felt anchored, weighted pleasantly by its own existence. Napoleon walked on, absorbing without claiming, moving through streets that remembered everything yet demanded nothing. Stone, brick, iron, and wood, all carried forward together, holding the city in a quiet equilibrium. And as Napoleon passed among them, He did not disturb that balance. He became part of it. The streets accepted his footsteps, adding them softly to the countless others already woven into their memory as London continued to unfold, patient, enduring, and deeply at ease with itself. The people of London. London's greatest strength revealed itself not in its buildings, nor even in its long memory, but in the quiet steadiness of its people. Napoleon began to notice them more closely now, not as a gathering crowd, but as individuals moving gently through the shared rhythm of the city. They did not hurry past one another, nor did they linger unnecessarily. Each person seemed to carry an unspoken understanding of space, how to share it, how to move within it without disturbance. Morning had matured into a settled afternoon. Markets were now fully formed, yet remained calm. Vendors stood behind wooden counters worn smooth by years of use. Produce was arranged thoughtfully, apples stacked in patient rows, greens laid out neatly, bread wrapped in simple cloth. Transactions unfolded quietly, accompanied by nods and soft words exchanged with familiarity rather than excitement. Napoleon passed among them without comment. A fishmonger glanced up, met his eyes briefly, then returned to his work without hesitation. A woman selecting vegetables paused for a moment, studying his face with mild curiosity, then continued her choice. Children stood close to their parents, observing the world around them with open attention, learning without instruction. The city did not treat him as spectacle. Instead, London's people regarded him as they regarded the weather or the turning of seasons, with awareness but without alarm. There was a shared confidence here, a belief that stability did not vanish simply because something new appeared. Napoleon sensed this trust and respected it. He passed a group of clerks walking together, their conversation drifting lazily between topics: ledgers, upcoming dinners, the comfort of routine. Their voices remained low, their laughter contained. He walked past artisans whose hands were marked by their craft, whose posture reflected long familiarity with their tools. In a quiet residential street, he observed daily life unfolding in its simplest form. A door opened to release the sound of sweeping. Laundry hung between buildings, stirring faintly in the air. A cat lay stretched across a windowsill, entirely unconcerned with the passage of history. Somewhere inside a home, a piano played softly, a simple melody repeated without flourish. These moments held no significance beyond themselves, and yet, together, they formed the city's true foundation. Napoleon felt this deeply. He understood now that London was not governed by force or fear, but by shared habit and mutual restraint. The people did not need to be instructed to remain calm. Calmness was already their default state. In a small square, he paused again. An elderly couple sat side by side on a bench, hands folded, watching the world move gently around them. Nearby, a young man read aloud quietly to a companion, his voice steady and unhurried. A dog slept in the shade, rising and falling with each breath. Napoleon stood there for a moment, not interrupting, not observed overtly, simply present. He thought of leadership not as direction, but as preservation. To lead such a people, one did not need to reshape them. One needed only to protect the conditions that allowed this calm to endure. As he continued walking, people occasionally inclined their heads in acknowledgement. There were no demands placed upon him, no expectations voiced. These gestures were neither submission nor challenge, only recognition. The afternoon light softened further, turning the city warm and amber. Shadows lengthened. The pace of movement slowed naturally, guided by the approaching evening. Napoleon passed a school as classes concluded. Children emerged quietly, their energy present but contained. Teachers stood at the doorway, exchanging brief words with parents. There was no rush to leave. The day released itself gently. London's people carried on. They moved toward dinners, toward rest, toward familiar routines. They did not speculate loudly. They did not demand certainty. They trusted the city, and in doing so, allowed it to remain at peace. Napoleon walked among them until his presence felt indistinguishable from the rhythm itself. And as the city continued to breathe evenly around him, it became clear that London had already decided something essential, that calm was not fragile, and that even history, when it arrived quietly, could be absorbed without disturbance. Parks, gardens, and stillness. As afternoon eased toward evening, London began to soften once more. The city's movement slowed not from fatigue but from rhythm. Work concluded naturally. Conversations lengthened. The air itself seemed to settle, carrying warmth and quiet in equal measure. It was during this gentle transition that Napoleon found himself drawn again toward the city's green spaces. London's parks did not interrupt the city. They breathed within it. Napoleon entered one through an open iron gate whose hinges made no sound. Gravel paths curved ahead, their pale surfaces catching the light softly. Grass stretched outward in calm expanses, dotted with trees that had grown accustomed to watching centuries pass beneath their branches. Here, the city released its edges, stone gave way to soil. Straight lines softened into curves. Sounds faded into distant murmur, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird settling for the evening. The park held stillness without emptiness, presence without pressure. Napoleon walked slowly along a path shaded by tall trees. Their branches reached overhead, filtering sunlight into drifting patterns that moved gently across the ground. Each step he took felt lighter here, cushioned by earth rather than stone. He allowed his pace to slow further, aligning himself with the measured calm of the place. People occupied the park without claiming it. A man sat on a bench reading, his posture relaxed, the book resting easily in his hands. Nearby, a woman strolled with a small child, their steps unhurried, their voices low and rhythmic. Others rested quietly, gazing upward, allowing thought to drift without direction. No one hurried past Napoleon. No one stopped him. They shared the space naturally, adjusting their paths with subtle awareness. This unspoken coordination impressed him deeply. Order here was not enforced. It was understood. He paused near a pond where the surface reflected sky and branches in perfect stillness. A single ripple appeared, widened, and disappeared again. Napoleon watched this small movement with attention, sensing how easily balance could be restored when disturbances were allowed to pass without resistance. Gardens within the park revealed themselves gradually. They were not extravagant. Flower beds were arranged with care rather than drama, colors chosen for harmony rather than display. Paths curved gently between them, inviting wandering without direction. Gardeners worked quietly, tending without haste, trimming and adjusting with hands guided by long familiarity. Napoleon observed them respectfully. These gardens were not expressions of power, they were acts of patience. He took a seat on a wooden bench beneath an old oak whose trunk bore the softened markings of age. The bench was smooth, shaped by countless hours of use. He rested there, hands folded loosely, gaze unfocused, allowing the city to exist around him without commentary. In this stillness, thought became gentle. He reflected not on campaigns or strategy, but on balance, on the idea that leadership, when done well, felt almost invisible, like the gardener's hand, guiding growth without forcing it, like the park itself, offering space without demanding attention. London, he realized, governed its calm internally. The park was proof of this, a shared understanding that peace required room to breathe, that stillness was not inactivity, but restoration. As the sun lowered further, light grew warm and golden. Leaves glowed softly. Shadows lengthened and stretched across paths. The air cooled just enough to refresh rather than chill. People began to rise from benches, moving toward home without urgency. Napoleon stood as well. He left the park as quietly as he had entered, passing again through the iron gate, returning to streets now touched with evening light. The city welcomed him back without change, its stone warmed, its pace slowed. Behind him, the park remained. It held its calm without need of witness, content in its purpose. And as Napoleon walked on, he carried that stillness with him, letting it settle into his understanding of the city he now moved within. A city that knew how to pause, how to rest, and how to remain whole. Houses of knowledge. Evening approached gently, and with it came a quieter kind of clarity. The streets near London's great houses of learning seemed to move at a slower tempo, as though thought itself required a softer pace. Napoleon walked toward these places not with intention, but with a natural pull, drawn by the same calm gravity that guided scholars and students there each day. Libraries stood with quiet dignity. Their stone facades were solid and unadorned, shaped not to impress but to endure. Tall windows caught the last of the daylight, reflecting it inward, offering illumination without glare. Doors opened inward with restrained weight, inviting entry rather than announcing it. Napoleon entered one such library as evening light stretched across its floors. Inside, silence was complete but not empty. It held the presence of countless thoughts resting together without conflict. Long tables extended through the hall, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use. Chairs stood neatly arranged, awaiting those who would return the next day. A few readers remained. They sat scattered throughout the room, each absorbed quietly, their movements minimal. Pages turned softly. A pen scratched gently across paper. The faint scent of leather and dust lingered, comforting rather than stale. Napoleon removed his hat instinctively. His steps became even more deliberate here, as though the space itself requested care. He walked along shelves that rose high toward the ceiling, their contents arranged with thoughtful precision. Titles in English rested beside volumes in French, Latin, and Greek, their spines forming a quiet conversation across centuries and borders. He paused often, sometimes to read a title, sometimes to trace the texture of a binding, sometimes simply to stand and let the atmosphere settle. Knowledge here was not hurried. It waited patiently, confident in its permanence. Napoleon selected a book at random and seated himself near a window. Outside, the city continued its gentle progression toward night. Inside, time loosened. He read slowly, allowing each sentence to rest before moving on. His thoughts drifted easily between the text and the quiet around him, finding harmony rather than distraction. He reflected on education, not as instruction but cultivation. London's schools mirrored this philosophy. Earlier that day he had passed classrooms where lessons unfolded without urgency. Teachers spoke calmly, students listened without tension. Learning was treated as a shared endeavor, not a contest. This approach resonated deeply. Napoleon had known systems driven by urgency, shaped by pressure and ambition. Here, he sensed a different strength, a belief that understanding grew best when allowed to deepen naturally. As twilight deepened, lamps were lit within the library. Their glow was warm and steady, casting soft pools of light across tables and shelves. Shadows gathered gently in corners, adding depth rather than obscurity. The readers who remained seemed unaffected by the shift, continuing their work with unbroken focus. Napoleon closed the book eventually, not because he had finished, but because the moment felt complete. He replaced it carefully, ensuring it rested properly among its companions. Knowledge, he understood, belonged to continuity, not consumption. When he left the library, the evening had fully arrived. The city outside felt quieter now, wrapped once more in lamplight. Streets reflected soft gold against stone. The Thames beyond glimmered faintly, carrying the day away. Napoleon walked on, carrying with him the calm assurance that a city devoted to learning, reflection, and patience could remain stable without force. London had taught him something essential. That wisdom did not announce itself loudly. It waited quietly for those willing to move slowly enough to notice. Gentle governance. Night had settled fully now, though London remained softly awake. Windows glowed with lamplight. Curtains shifted as evening breezes wandered through open rooms. The city did not draw a sharp line between work and rest. It allowed one to ease naturally into the other. It was within this atmosphere of unforced transition that Napoleon began to take part, quietly, almost invisibly, in the governance of the city. There were no grand halls filled with echoes. Instead, meetings occurred in modest rooms with wooden tables worn smooth by years of use. Chairs were arranged simply. Papers were laid out carefully, corners aligned, ink bottles placed within easy reach. The tone of these gatherings was neither formal nor casual, but settled, an extension of London's steady temperament. Napoleon entered such a room one evening without ceremony. Those present rose briefly, then sat again, movements economical and unhurried. There was no anticipation of command, only readiness to listen. Candles burned steadily along the walls, their flames barely stirring, casting soft light across calm faces. Discussion unfolded slowly. Matters of administration were approached with patience. Words were chosen carefully, allowed space to breathe. When someone spoke, others listened fully, not preparing replies, but receiving meaning. Questions were asked gently. Decisions were shaped gradually, refined through quiet consideration rather than urgency. Napoleon spoke less than many expected. When he did, his voice was low and even, carrying thought rather than instruction. He did not impose direction. He offered perspective, observing how existing systems already functioned, how balance had been maintained over time. London's governance, he realized, was built on continuity. Rules existed not to assert authority, but to preserve rhythm. Institutions were respected not because they were powerful, but because they were familiar. Change, when necessary, was introduced carefully, like a new stone placed into an old wall, shaped to fit rather than to stand out. Napoleon found himself learning as much as guiding. He listened to clerks who knew the city's habits intimately. to administrators who understood the flow of daily life as one understands the turning of seasons. Their knowledge was not theoretical, it was lived. When the meeting concluded, there was no sense of resolution or triumph, only completion. Papers were gathered quietly. Chairs were pushed in with care. Good nights were exchanged softly, without lingering. Each person returned to their place in the city's rhythm, confident that what had been discussed would unfold naturally in time. Napoleon walked out into the lamplit street alone. The air was cool now, refreshing rather than cold. His footsteps echoed faintly before dissolving into the night. He felt no weight of command pressing upon him. Instead, there was a lightness, a sense that leadership, when shared, became less a burden and more a form of stewardship. As days followed, governance continued in this same manner. Policies adjusted gradually. Small refinements were made without announcement. The city did not feel managed. It felt cared for. London continued to function as it always had, only with an added sense of attentiveness, as though someone had placed a steady hand upon its shoulder without tightening their grip. Napoleon observed this effect with quiet satisfaction. He understood now that authority did not need to be visible to be effective, that calm could be guided without being controlled, that peace endured best when it was protected gently, rather than defended loudly. The city responded in kind. There were no demonstrations, no declarations. Daily life continued uninterrupted. Markets, schools, workshops, homes, all moving within the same dependable rhythm. And as night deepened once more, London rested easily beneath its steady governance, unaware of how little had changed and how much had been preserved. Cultural weaving. Change, when it came to London, arrived quietly. It did not announce itself as transformation. It appeared instead as subtle variation, small adjustments that settled naturally into place, almost unnoticed at first. Napoleon observed this with appreciation as days and weeks passed, each one layering gently atop the last. The city began to weave. French and British customs met not in confrontation but in curiosity. A cafe near a familiar street corner adjusted its menu slightly, offering delicate pastries beside traditional breads. The scent of butter and warm dough mingled with the usual aromas, becoming simply another comfort woven into the morning air. Language flowed easily. English remained dominant, steady and reassuring, but French phrases drifted into conversation without effort. They were spoken softly, tested gently, enjoyed for their sound as much as their meaning. No one corrected accents. Understanding mattered more than precision. Napoleon noticed this blending most clearly in places where people lingered. In reading rooms, French philosophical works appeared quietly among English volumes, their spines settling naturally into the shelves. In drawing rooms, conversations turned to ideas of reason, order, and balance, not as debates, but as reflections shared calmly over tea. Music followed the same path. In the evenings, melodies drifted from open windows, familiar English tunes softened by subtle variations inspired by continental influence. Instruments were played not for performance, but for atmosphere. Sound filled rooms gently, never demanding attention. Napoleon moved through these spaces without comment. He did not direct this blending, he allowed it. He understood now that culture, when left unforced, found its own harmony. The city did not lose its identity, it expanded it. Fashion shifted slowly. Cuts remained familiar, practical, modest. Yet fabrics softened, details appeared. A different fold here, a subtle variation there. Nothing dramatic, just enough to suggest openness. Napoleon found these changes reassuring. They indicated comfort rather than compliance. The city accepted what suited it and ignored what did not. This restraint pleased him more than any display of allegiance could have. In schools, lessons broadened gently. Students read texts from both traditions, not to compare, but to understand. Teachers guided discussion calmly, allowing curiosity to unfold without competition. Knowledge became a shared space rather than a divided one. Napoleon visited such a classroom once, standing quietly at the back. He listened as a teacher spoke in measured tones, explaining ideas without haste. Students listened attentively, untroubled by his presence. The lesson continued uninterrupted, as though history itself had chosen not to intrude. Outside, the city moved on. Markets buzzed softly. Parks welcomed evening walkers. The Thames continued its slow, steady flow. London remained unmistakably itself, rooted, calm, enduring. Napoleon felt no need to intervene. Cultural blending, he realized, was not something to be orchestrated. It was something to be allowed. Given space, given time, it found balance naturally. As night returned once more, the city glowed warmly, its lights reflected in windows and water alike. Inside homes, people rested in familiar routines, now subtly enriched, never overwhelmed. The weaving continued, quiet, patient, nearly invisible. And London, wrapped in its steady calm, accepted each new thread without strain, carrying them forward together into nights that felt no different, only deeper, fuller, and quietly at ease. Passing years. Time moved differently now, not faster, not slower, but deeper, settling into the city like a steady tide that reshaped nothing abruptly, yet altered everything gently over its passing. Days followed days with comforting reliability, and years arrived without announcement, folding themselves softly into memory. London grew accustomed to this rhythm. Seasons turned with familiar grace. Spring returned each year with pale blossoms along quiet streets and parks softened by new green. Summer lingered gently, warming brick and stone, stretching evenings into long golden pauses. Autumn arrived with measured calm, leaves drifting down without hurry, gathering along paths and riverbanks. Winter followed, cool and reflective, drawing people inward without hardship. Napoleon remained. He did not mark time with proclamations. He felt it instead in small changes. The way a tree in a familiar square grew broader, the way a child he had once noticed now walked with confident steps, the way routines settled more deeply into place. The city stabilized not because it was held still, but because it was allowed to move naturally. Governance continued quietly. Administrations adjusted with care. Traditions remained intact, subtly refined rather than replaced. London functioned like a well-tended garden, growth guided gently, excess trimmed without severity. Napoleon's presence became ordinary. People no longer paused to notice him in the streets. He walked freely, often alone, moving at a pace shaped by thought rather than destination. He was no longer something new. He was part of the city's continuity. Libraries gained new volumes. Some were written in French, some in English, many in both. Margins filled slowly with notes from careful readers. Schools continued their calm instruction, shaping minds without pressure. The next generation grew up knowing peace as the default state. not the exception. Napoleon watched this with quiet reflection. He understood that stability did not announce itself loudly. It revealed itself in the absence of tension, in the way people planned years ahead without fear, in the way evenings felt untroubled by uncertainty. The Thames flowed on. Its waters carried reflections of bridges that had stood long before Napoleon arrived and would remain long after he was gone. Boats passed with steady rhythm. The river neither remembered nor forgot. It simply continued. Evenings grew familiar, lamplight, soft conversation, the quiet closing of shops, homes drawing inward. London rested easily each night, confident in the morning to come. Napoleon felt time settle within him as well. His steps slowed slightly, his thoughts lingered longer. He spent more time seated, reading, observing, listening. He did not resist this change. He welcomed it. Years passed without ceremony, and in their passing, London became not a city held by leadership, but a city held by balance, steady, calm, and deeply rooted in the quiet confidence that nothing needed to be forced. Time continued its gentle work, and the city allowed itself to be shaped by it, one peaceful day at a time. London at peace. Peace, when it endures long enough, becomes almost invisible. It settles into the background of daily life, no longer noticed as a condition, but felt as a quiet certainty. London had reached this state gently, without marking the moment. The city simply continued, day after day, until calm became its most natural expression. Mornings arrived without apprehension. People woke with the same unhurried trust they had come to expect. Windows were opened to familiar streets. The sound of footsteps below carried no urgency. Bells rang the hours as they always had, steady and reassuring. The city did not brace itself for the day. It welcomed it. Markets unfolded with ease. Vendors greeted regular customers by name. Goods were arranged with practiced care. Conversations flowed softly, touching on weather, family, small plans for the coming weeks. There was no tension in these exchanges, no sense of waiting for disruption. Napoleon moved through these spaces quietly. He was rarely noticed now, and when he was, it was without surprise. He belonged to the city's rhythm, woven into it so thoroughly that his presence no longer shifted the air. This anonymity pleased him. It felt like confirmation that the balance had held. London's institutions reflected the same steadiness. Courts functioned calmly, guided by precedent and reason. Schools continued their careful instruction, shaping minds patiently. Libraries remained sanctuaries of silence and thought, their shelves heavier each year with accumulated wisdom. Parks filled and emptied with the day. Children played quietly, walkers moved at leisurely pace. Elderly couples sat side by side, watching time pass without anxiety. Nature within the city flourished not wildly, but harmoniously, shaped by attentive care rather than control. Napoleon often visited these parks in the late afternoon. He sat beneath familiar trees, now broader and more sheltering than they had been years before. He watched shadows lengthen across the grass and listened to the city's distant murmur, softened by leaves and air. He reflected on peace not as achievement, but as maintenance. Peace, he understood, was sustained through restraint, through knowing when not to act, through trusting systems that had proven their worth over time. London had taught him this lesson patiently, without instruction. The city no longer needed reassurance. Its people planned futures calmly. Children imagined lives shaped by choice rather than fear. Time stretched forward without sharp edges. As evening returned, lights appeared in windows across the city. Families gathered for meals. Friends met in quiet rooms. Music drifted faintly through open panes, never loud, never demanding. The Thames reflected the glow, carrying it gently downstream. Napoleon walked once more along the riverbank. He leaned lightly against the stone, watching the water move with unchanging patience. He felt no desire to shape it, no need to alter its course. It flowed as it always had, and London flowed with it. Peace had become the city's quiet companion. It required no guarding now. It simply existed, held in place by habit, trust, and the shared understanding that calm was something worth preserving. And as night settled once more over London, the city rested easily within that peace, confident that it would still be there when morning returned. Napoleon in later life, age arrived without ceremony. It came not as a sudden change, but as a gradual softening, an easing of sharp lines, a quiet reordering of priorities. Napoleon noticed it first in the mornings, in the way he preferred to sit a little longer before rising, allowing the day to settle around him before he joined it. London mirrored this gentleness. The city, too, seemed content to move with less urgency. Not slower, exactly, but with deeper intention. Each moment felt fuller, less concerned with what followed. Time had become something to inhabit rather than pursue. Napoleon's hair had turned a muted grey, blending easily with the city's familiar tones of stone and sky. His face carried lines shaped not by strain but by years of observation. His eyes remained attentive, though their focus had shifted, from outward motion to inward balance. He lived simply now. His rooms were modest and uncluttered, overlooking a garden that required little tending. Roses bloomed there in quiet cycles, their colors softened by shade. Paths curved naturally between beds of green, inviting slow walks and moments of rest. Napoleon spent many hours there, seated beneath a tree, hands folded loosely, breathing in the steady calm of the place. Books accompanied him always. They rested on tables, beside chairs, near windows. He read without urgency, sometimes returning to the same passages across days or weeks. Philosophy, poetry, gentle histories, works that did not demand conclusions, only reflection. Visitors still came, though less frequently now. They spoke softly, aware of the tone of the space. Conversations were unhurried, filled with listening rather than assertion. Napoleon offered thoughts when asked, but more often he allowed silence to do the work. He had learned that silence, when shared, could be more instructive than words. London continued to thrive. The city did not depend on him, and that knowledge brought him quiet satisfaction. Systems functioned smoothly. People lived comfortably within routines shaped by trust. Change occurred when needed, but without disruption. Napoleon often walked through familiar streets in the early evening. He favored paths he knew well, routes where each doorway and corner carried memory without nostalgia. The city greeted him not as a figure of importance, but as a presence woven into its continuity. Children passed him without recognition. Shopkeepers nodded politely, unaware of history moving beside them. This anonymity felt like a gift. He understood now that leadership, when done well, eventually disappeared into the fabric of daily life. As night approached, he returned home and sat by the window. London spread out before him, lights glowing softly, sounds drifting upward in gentle layers. The Thames beyond reflected the city's quiet warmth, carrying it onward without effort. Napoleon felt no urgency to shape what came next. He trusted the city, he trusted time, and as the evening deepened, he allowed himself to rest more fully than before, content in the knowledge that balance, once found, could endure, held not by force, but by the steady willingness of people and place to remain calm together. Lessons of balance. In the quiet years that followed, reflection became Napoleon's most faithful companion. It arrived not as deliberate thought, but as a gentle presence that settled beside him during long walks, during pauses between pages, during moments when the city seemed to breathe in unison with his own slow rhythm. Balance, he realized, was not something achieved once and then held forever. It was something tended, like a garden, through patience and restraint. London offered constant reminders. The city balanced stone and green, tradition and openness, movement and rest. It did not resist change, nor did it rush toward it. Instead, it allowed ideas to arrive, tested them quietly, and kept only what felt natural to its deeper character. Napoleon often walked along the Thames at dawn. The river was calm at that hour, its surface smooth and reflective, carrying pale light as though it were another form of memory. He watched boats move steadily through the water, their paths guided not by force, but by familiarity. The river did not command them, it supported them. Leadership, he reflected, should feel the same. He thought of earlier years, of urgency, of certainty, of the belief that direction alone could shape the world. London had softened that belief, not by argument, but by example. Here, order arose from trust. Authority rested lightly, its presence felt only when needed. These thoughts did not trouble him. They settled gently, like conclusions reached without debate. In quiet rooms, he spoke occasionally with younger leaders and scholars who sought understanding rather than instruction. He encouraged them to observe before acting, to listen before deciding. He reminded them that calm was not weakness, and patience was not delay. London absorbed these ideas naturally. Institutions continued their steady work. People lived without fear of sudden upheaval. Plans extended forward with confidence, supported by systems that valued continuity over spectacle. Napoleon watched this unfold with quiet gratitude. He felt no desire to leave a legacy marked by monuments or declarations. The city itself was enough, a living example of balance maintained through collective restraint. Evenings brought comfort. He sat by the window as lamps appeared along the streets below, each one glowing steadily, neither bright nor dim. The pattern repeated night after night, dependable and soothing. The city's sounds softened into a gentle hum, carrying no urgency, no demand. He rested easily within this rhythm. Balance, he understood now, was not the absence of motion, but the harmony of it. London moved, but it did not rush. It changed, but it did not forget. It listened to its people, to its past, to the quiet guidance of time itself. And in these reflections, Napoleon found peace, not as an achievement, but as a shared understanding between himself and the city that had taught him how to remain still while everything else continued to unfold. The long evening, the later years arrived like a lengthening twilight. Days did not shorten suddenly. Light did not disappear at once. Instead, everything softened. Edges blurred, colors warmed, and time itself seemed to stretch, allowing each moment to settle fully before giving way to the next. Napoleon lived within this long evening with quiet acceptance. His routines became simpler. Mornings began slowly, often with tea taken near an open window. He watched the city wake without needing to join it immediately. Sounds drifted upward, footsteps, distant bells, the low murmur of conversation, familiar and reassuring. London did not require his attention now. It carried itself with ease. He spent much of his time seated, sometimes in his garden, where leaves stirred gently and shadows moved across the ground like passing thoughts. Sometimes indoors, surrounded by books that no longer needed to be finished to be enjoyed. He read until his eyes grew tired, then rested, letting memory and imagination blend softly. Visitors came rarely now. When they did, they spoke quietly, sensing the tone of the space. Conversations were brief and gentle, more shared silence than spoken words. Napoleon listened with patience, offering smiles, nods, the occasional thought shaped carefully and given without urgency. The city outside continued unchanged. Children grew into adults, new families formed, streets aged gracefully, repaired where needed, left undisturbed where time had softened them beautifully. London's calm deepened rather than faded. Napoleon took shorter walks now, favoring familiar paths. He paused often, not from weakness but from inclination. He enjoyed standing still, watching light shift across stone, listening to water move, feeling the air change with the hour. These moments required no interpretation. They were complete on their own. As evenings fell, lamps appeared as they always had. Their warm glow traced the city's shape gently, outlining streets and bridges, windows and doorways. The Thames reflected these lights in long, wavering lines, carrying them onward without effort. Napoleon watched from his window. He felt no sense of ending, only continuation. The long evening held him comfortably, wrapping him in familiarity. There were no regrets that demanded attention, no unfinished plans calling out. The city was stable. Its people were at ease. Balance had been found and maintained. Night arrived slowly, and when it did, it brought rest rather than darkness. Napoleon slept deeply, undisturbed, held by the same calm that had shaped his later years. London watched over him as it always had, quietly, steadily, its rhythm unbroken, its presence enduring, its long evenings stretching on without urgency or fear. The city remains. Night returned to London as it always had, not as an ending but as a deepening. The city settled beneath the familiar cover of darkness, lamps glowing softly along streets and bridges, their reflections drifting lazily across the surface of the Thames. Fog gathered gently near the river once more, thin and untroubled, moving where it pleased, resting where it wished. London breathed. Inside quiet rooms, people slept easily. The day had been ordinary, complete, and unremarkable in the most comforting way. Fires had dimmed to embers. Books lay open where reading had given way to rest. Curtains were drawn with the same careful motions that had closed countless evenings before. Napoleon rested too. There was no moment to mark, no threshold crossed with significance. He remained part of the city's stillness, folded gently into its rhythm, his presence neither announced nor absent. Time continued without needing to acknowledge him. Morning would come. It would arrive softly, just as it always had. Light slipping gradually across rooftops, the river catching pale reflections, the city returning to itself without effort. London did not rely on memory alone. It carried continuity forward naturally. From one quiet day to the next, the parks would open. Paths would welcome unhurried footsteps. Trees would stand patient, leaves stirring faintly in the air. Benches would receive those who wished to sit and watch time pass without demand. Libraries would remain. Their shelves would hold words written long ago and words yet to be read. Silence would settle there faithfully, waiting for minds willing to move slowly enough to meet it. Homes would wake gently, kettles would warm, bread would be broken. Conversations would begin without urgency. The city would live, not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily, as it had learned to do so well. London did not remember conquest, it remembered balance. Stone and water, thought and habit, past and present, each remained in quiet alignment. The city endured not because it resisted change, but because it welcomed it carefully, allowing nothing to disturb its deeper calm. And so the night held. The river flowed on. Lanterns burned steadily. The streets rested beneath their familiar sky. There was nothing left to resolve, only the quiet certainty that London would continue, unchanged in its essence, untroubled in its sleep, carrying its calm forward, one gentle breath at a time, until thought itself grew drowsy and the listener too could rest within the same peaceful silence.